As I mentioned to you before, this conversation is on operationalizing the single African air transport market, an opportunity for optimizing the value of the ACFTA, and it is going to be moderated by the Managing Director of AviaDev, Jon Howell. Jon, the floor is now yours. You can take it away.
Thank you, Makeda, and Mwara Mutse, everybody over there in beautiful Kigali. I hope I said that correctly. I want to start, first of all, by thanking Kwache and the Africa Tourism Partners team for putting together this really vital forum in such challenging times for our industry, both as meeting planners and also as aviators, tourism practitioners, hospitality professionals. It's a really difficult time. So it's great to be with you all today, and obviously I'd much rather be with you there in Rwanda itself. Rwanda is a place that will always have a special place in my heart. That building that you're in today is actually where AviaDev began life back in 2016. We held our first two AviaDev Africas right there in the convention center. So I've still got many friends in the country. I'm always inspired by the vision and ambition of Rwanda, especially when it comes to aviation, actually, and tourism generally. So thank you for having us with you. And as I say, I know we'd all rather be with you in person. I'm also have a link with Rwanda in that I'm a global ambassador for Guerrilla conservation. So I do fundraising and have been lucky enough to visit the mountain gorillas both in Rwanda and Uganda. So anybody who hasn't done that, that should be right at the top of your list if you're in Rwanda or you're planning to come to Rwanda in the future. So as Makeda very kindly said, my name's Jon Howell. I'm the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We're a platform that is dedicated to developing air connectivity to, from, but most importantly within Africa. It's a very underserved market in terms of the intra-African market, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So what we've been able to do is we've been able to assemble a knowledgeable and inspirational panel for the session. So what I'd like to do is, I know they're all here on the stage, so I will introduce the topic and then I'll give you a really brief introduction to each one and we'll get straight into the talking points. So we're here to discuss operationalizing the single African air transport market and its role in enabling the African Continental Free Trade Area and driving tourism. And some of the things that we aim to answer today are as follows. First of all, for those of you who aren't 100% familiar, a quick overview of what SAATM is. That's the Single African Air Transport Market acronym. What does it set out to achieve? Where are we up to? Is now the best time to implement it? What are the various stakeholders doing and what can they do more of to ensure implementation? And how can we push this forward as a result of today's conversation? So I'd like to introduce my panel. So Adefunke, I think, has had a couple of issues. I saw her appear, but she seems to have gone again. So I'm hoping she'll be back with us because she's fantastic and she's been a great partner of ours over the years. Adefunke Adeyemi, she was recently honored as one of the 200 globally most influential people of African descent. She's a catalyst of change. She's an influencer. She's a thought leader. She's a lawyer, a global aviation expert, a mentor, and she's really been spearheading IATA's efforts over the last few years in the African and Middle East region as well. So her current role is Regional Director, Advocacy and Strategic Relations for IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, and she advocates for the sustainability and growth of the aviation industry across Africa, highlighting its values to economies and societies as an enabler, connector, and a force for good. So I really hope we can get Funke on with us, but we'll see how that goes. Our next panelist is somebody else I know very well, Aaron Munetsi. Aaron has a rich history working for South African Airways for 25 years, rising from the role of ticketing agent all the way up to chief commercial officer. His achievements are numerous. He's created partnerships and links across Africa, and he's lived in numerous countries, although I don't think Rwanda quite yet, Aaron, so you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think Rwanda might be one still left on the list to tick. He's committed to serving the community of African airlines by giving every ounce of energy and his time to the common cause of sustainable and profitable growth. And he's also a wonderful speaker, not to build him up too much. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Aaron. Eric Ntagengerwa is currently the Senior Policy Officer Air Transport at the African Union Commission under the Department of Infrastructure and Energy. His role includes coordination of the air transport projects and, of course, the operationalization of the single African air transport market. So we're here to hear about him today. He's going to help us with the SAATM and where we're up to. Eric is a proud Rwandan. He's got more than 16 years demonstrated experience in various fields of transport. He's involved in planning, management, and policy development as well. Now our final panelist today, last but not least, is Alain Renaud, who's been in the role of Seychelles Principal Secretary for Civil Aviation, Ports and Marine. So a huge portfolio there, Alan, especially as an island. You must be busy with ports and marine as well as aviation. And he's been in that position since November 2018. He's a pure aviator as well, having served as a GM for Revenue Management Alliances, Aeropolitical and Public Affairs at Air Seychelles, which is the national airline of the Republic of Seychelles, with 15 years there at the airline, working across lots of different roles. So he's been really involved, of course, with everything from the COVID reopening and the protocols when it comes to operationalizing the actual market itself and getting Seychelles back to business and open for tourism. So it's going to be an incredible panel. Thank you all for joining us virtually and live there in Kigali. And what I would like to do is I'd like to start with Eric, because Eric is coming to us from Addis, from the African Union. And I think what we'd like to understand here, for those of you who aren't, is just exactly what is the SAATM, Eric? What is it? What does it set out to do? And who is responsible for delivering it? So over to you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for this opportunity. The Single African Air Transport Market is one of the 12 flagship projects of the AU Agenda 2063. This big program has been started long ago because in 2015, the summit of the African Union, after realizing that the fostering African air transport market through air transport liberalization is very important for the regional integration of the continent, they have launched the Single African Air Transport Market in January 2018 on 29 at the 30th Ordinary Summit session of AU. The main objective of SAATM is to create one single air transport market in Africa, liberalize air transport services, and drive economic integration. As a flagship project of AU Agenda 2063, the SAATM strongly supports the continental free trade area and the free movement of persons by improving connectivity and creating a safe, secure, and affordable air transport industry in Africa. Currently, 34 member states of AU have joined, and those 34 states constitute over 800 million, which is 61% of African population, and they account for over 89% of intra-Africa air transport market. The SAATM is implemented by the African Civil Aviation Commission, which has been mandated as an executing agency of the market, and is supported by a Yamoussoukro decision monitoring body. The SAATM was funded on the Yamoussoukro decision, which was adopted in 2000. And the SAATM has what we call a SAATM stakeholders framework, which is made of various air transport stakeholders in Africa, including, of course, African Airline Association, including IATA, and also coordinated by AFCAC, and also including the regional economic communities. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I was fortunate enough, first thing to say, I have to declare, I was actually at the African Union for the signing in January 2018. So I was there in that building for that historic moment, and it felt like we were at the beginning of a new dawn as much as anything else. And you know, you mentioned it yourself. There's 34 countries that have signed up. There are 14, I believe, who are submitted to the implementation memorandum. And there are 8 countries that have completely fulfilled the requirements of all of the pillars to actually implement it. So I guess the question, just to come back to you, Eric, just so we can close this bit off, is, you know, when do we think we're going to see the first SAATM compliant operations actually start? How close are we to seeing it actually operationalize?
Thank you, John. I just wanted to mention that the SAATM has adopted a prioritized action plan. That prioritized action plan has 6 pillars, and every state which is joining the SAATM commit what we call concrete measures. They are concrete measures which are immediately implemented by the joining states. As you said, one of the key concrete measures is to sign a memorandum of implementation, but also to change their bilateral air services agreements to be compliant to the YD provision. That is to remove restriction in terms of frequency, in terms of price, in terms of granting of traffic rights. So currently, the African Union Commission and AFCAC is working on having the rest of the states to join the SAATM, but even the 34 who have joined, we are looking at operationalizing the SAATM by implementing its concrete measures. So the timeline I can give is that in our plan is to have, by end of the year 2022, to have all the states who have joined, but already by year 2021, we want to see all the joining states are able to immediately implement the concrete measures.
Fantastic. Thank you for the update. And I'm hoping we'll get Funke's connection to work. So because IATA are doing great work in terms of advocating the benefits of SAATM. So I want to talk to her a little bit about that. But I want to come to Aaron now, because Aaron and I have known each other for a long time. We've been involved in numerous conversations around this topic. And, the execution of SAATM, we had this sort of false dawn, I think, January 2018. We thought it might come back a bit quicker. So I want to come back to you, Aaron, or I want to come to you and just say, is this reminiscent of what happened with Yamoussoukro? You've been through that process and there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So, what needs to be done right now from your side, do you think, to get this project off the ground?
Thank you, John. Thank you very much to ATLF for inviting me. I think there are three things that I'd like to say. The first one is that, yes, from where we sit as aviation practitioners, the SAATM progress is almost reminiscent of the YD event as well. Because once YD was promulgated, we were very excited because we knew what needed to be done. So we are thinking, some of us are actually thinking back to those days of YD and with a lot of anticipation, excitement, and enthusiasm, saying there are things that need to be done in order for us to open the African airspace, especially and particularly to African airlines. So that's one thing I wanted to say, that there is a lot of excitement and enthusiasm now because of SAATM, as was back then because of the YD. The second thing, John, is to say that with all that excitement, enthusiasm, and looking forward to an open skies for the African continent, for African airlines, there is also trepidation that is setting in, because when you look at what Eric has just said in his preamble, 34 countries have signed up. The big question to ask ourselves is, so how many have actually implemented SAATM? And I think the answer is a very sad reality of where we are. And I'm not even talking of post-COVID or during COVID. I'm talking of pre-COVID. I think 34 countries had signed before COVID. And there was hardly any proof that this thing was being implemented. So that's where the trepidation is coming in. And the third aspect I want to talk about, John, and maybe spend a bit of time on, is what needs to be done. I think we must not fool ourselves and say that once COVID is over, we're going to have a reset and we're going to start afresh. Number one, I think the reality now has sunk in across the entire world that COVID is not going to be over soon. We are seeing the second waves, in some countries even third waves coming through, and maybe the hope is that the pandemic will be downgraded to become endemic once the vaccine is in place. But the reality for us as African aviators is that we are not going to have the luxury of a restart. The luxury that we have in a very confined space is a reset. We need to reset the things that we know were not working even prior to COVID-19 hitting us. If you look at the landscape of African airlines, save for one or two airlines.
Oh, we've lost Aaron. I think his connection's dropped off. We'll see whether he pops back. But I think his point there is that, as I think it was Einstein that said, the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting it. Oh, he's back.
The factor that they need to have is, do they have positive cash flow? And for me, John, SAATM should actually be addressing an issue around how do we enable African airlines not to restart, but to reset and get going as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. We lost you for a minute there, Aaron, but we caught the end of it. And I was just summarizing what you were saying in terms of, we just need to build back differently. We need to reset, not just restart, but reset, look at everything again and start again. We have that opportunity.
Right.
And I really wanted to come to Adefunke now. And she is here. Fantastic. We see you now, Adefunke. So all we've done so far, I don't know how much of it you caught. Eric's given us an overview of what SAATM is, where we're up to, how it should be implemented, when we can start to see the first fully compliant SAATM operations. And Aaron's talked a little bit about his frustrations around, is this a replication of what happened with YD? We need to start to actually get things moving. And I was saying that as IATA, of course, you've done some incredible work with advocacy in the region. So give us an idea. First question, I suppose, is now the right time to be working on this implementation? And, what kind of barriers are you encountering when you speak to states and lobby for them to adopt the SAATM?
And hello to everyone. It's good to be with you again and watching or listening in. It's a pleasure. John, the short answer to funding, yes. SAATM creates, no matter the situation, from Eric and about how important, just to, is one of the main objectives of the SAATM, promote the development of African aviation and the benefits of economic and social emancipation. That is the benefit and the purpose. So, once we have that, then that lofty will always be relevant, whether it is a bust season or a crisis like we find ourselves with the pandemic. So definitely this is the time. And it becomes more important now as the whole world locked down as a result of this crisis. And so everyone became insular again. And aviation has done, over the years, since the 70s, aviation has actually created connectivity across the world so that it made the world much smaller. But now with the crisis and the challenges that aviation is facing, it's making our world a lot bigger. We know already in Africa, our geographical landmass and so on makes it extremely difficult to move around. And the fact that we don't have these alternative forms of transportation. So the SAATM becomes even more essential in this period of time. And just again to remind ourselves of what are the particular benefits to aviation of implementing SAATM. One is increasing connectivity, of course, across the continent and all of the benefits that brings. The other is increasing cooperation amongst the airlines so that it can generate increased efficiencies and economies of scale and so on, and all within a competitive environment. So this is exactly what Africa and the global aviation community requires right now. Now, the work being done on SAATM, I believe, must continue. And thankfully, we've heard from the African Union that's spearheading, this campaign. It's one of their flagship projects under their Agenda 2063. AFCAC, of course, is the executing agency. AFRA, of course, is also a key player. And so many of the other stakeholders, including ourselves, we're firmly committed to the SAATM implementation, even as we continue to manage the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let me just speak to that. The main fallout, of course, is financial, but there's also the bigger fallout to the impact that this has had on people and on economies, just the fact that airlines were not able to fly. At the peak of the crisis, we had aviation had come to a screeching halt. 95% of flights were down between May and June. 95%, meaning there was hardly any flying. the only thing that was moving in terms of aviation was cargo. And, that itself shows the essential impact of aviation on our world. The fact that aviation was able to move around all of the equipment that was needed, essential services, PPEs, masks, medical equipment, and so on, throughout the peak of the crisis to help so many countries to fight the pandemic. It just shows how critical this industry is. So, the fallout has been quite devastating. I think this is the biggest challenge that aviation has ever faced in all of its, history of, 100 years. It's worse than the Great Depression. It's worse than 9/11, the volcanic ash crisis. This is just the most unprecedented challenge that we have ever faced. In terms of numbers, passenger revenues were down by about $6 billion was our conservative estimate. I think that figure is even more, but conservatively it was $6 billion. And as I said, in May, 95% of flights stopped. We had projected about 2 months ago that by the time that the aviation industry starts to reopen and restart, we will see those numbers go up to 45%. Right now, we've just done a new analysis, a reforecast, and it's really not looking likely. Basically, what we're looking to see, what we're likely to see in this year is 30% of 2019 levels throughout 2020 in terms of flights. So this is already quite devastating for aviation, which already had quite a number of challenges. Now, the promise of SAATM is that we can realize our potential, and that's what we need to focus on. The other challenge, apart from financial, is the fact that as borders have started to reopen, there's still quite some challenges with restrictions on not just airspace in terms of market access, but also on capacity where market access is permitted. So what do I mean by this? African markets before, quite dependent on many of the markets outside of Africa. Of course, it's all important. All of it together is important. But now we have a situation where the African markets have opened up more to each other than that African normally flies or normally comes to Africa. For example, with the EU, they have a ban on most of the world at the moment. Today, only 11 states outside of the EU are allowed to go into European borders. And on the challenge in terms of how aviation will recover. This is quite a big challenge in terms of how aviation will recover. Did you say I was back, John? Did you miss?
Yeah, you're back. You just dropped for 3 seconds, but you're back now.
Oh, okay, all right. So what I was saying was that, there's some travel restrictions at the moment based on, regions where they have a high number of cases and where the pandemic is still ravaging, where they're starting to see an increased number of cases and new waves and second waves coming up. And so that is also impacting connectivity with Africa. So this is the time for Africans to look inward. And I'm particularly pleased to see that the restart of aviation in Africa is actually happening first and foremost between African states. So this is the moment where we're supposed to seize on this intra-African traffic connectivity promise under the SAATM and really push for it. We must recover. African aviation must recover, and African aviation should be able to help African economies recover. The final point I'll make on this issue before I hand over back to you, John, is that in July of this Continental Free Trade Area was launched. We have to be able to take advantage of this. Aviation is a facilitator for this great initiative of having a free trade area. The forecasts show that if this free trade area comes fully on steam, it will be the largest trading bloc in the world. Our potential is always there. I mean, we just have this potential all we have to do is realize it. And we must keep our eye on the prize and focus. This operationalization of SAATM will play a defining role in determining the speed at which African aviation and African economies will recover. Over to you, John.
Amazing. Thank you for that rallying cry. I mean, there was so much that came out there. All of the tourism practitioners, we don't need to tell you how reliant we are as an industry on aviation. I think the UN WTO say that nearly 60% of tourists arrive at their destination by air. So that shows that. I think the other thing is that the pandemic's shown is how reliant Africa is on international trade and tourism. And when that was stopped, then we obviously, we were like, right, we need to scramble to create domestic products, regional products. And also, there is no alternative. As Funke said, the landmass is too big. The alternative modes of transport are simply not there. It has to build back, but we need to build it back close to home first. And it's great to see, actually, quite a lot of new routes being launched. Ethiopia never stopped flying during the whole pandemic. They were bringing in PPE to the whole of Africa. And there's lots of new airlines or new routes starting up over the last few weeks as the borders have started to open. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. So what I want to do now is I want to come to Alan. So thank you for sitting so patiently for us, Alan. But it's slightly different for Seychelles because, first of all, you're an island destination. So aviation is even more vital in terms of the percentage of tourists that come into your country and how you trade as well. It's yes, okay, there's ships, but it's aviation is really important for fresh produce. And of course, you also have this unique, well, not unique, but you have this situation of having a flag carrier, having a national airline as well, Air Seychelles. So is SAATM something you welcome? Would you like more competition for the national airline? Would you like to see that in Seychelles?
Thanks, John, and hello to all my colleagues. The audience. I will say this. So I had a front row seat to what's happened in Seychelles when I was with Air Seychelles for 16 years. And in 2011, we had only 8 active bilaterals with our traditional markets. And we entered a partnership with, at that time, which was Etihad Airways. And we realized that Seychelles had to open up its airspace. And I remember at the time, we as an airline were like a traditional African airline in the sense we were a little bit protectionist, we're a bit worried about competition. A few years earlier, we had 70% of the market share. But over the last few years, before 2012, we saw Emirates and Qatar take more airspace. So we were a bit, trepidatious about it. But then we decided, okay, let's just go for it. We're going to open up all the skies. And we started an aggressive program of adding more bilaterals. So in 2011, we had 8 bilaterals. Today, in 2020, we have 91.
Wow.
And in that time, it's not quite SAATM, but it's actually quite similar because we aggressively pursued open bilaterals with our neighbors in Africa, with Europe, all of our traditional markets. And exactly as expected, we saw tourism start to grow at double-digit levels for almost 8 years continuously. And we saw more airlines come. So, in fact, in 2012, we had 100,000 tourists a year. We're a small market. In 2019, we're looking at 400,000 tourists a year, right? And 14 airlines flying in, more than Durban, to a tiny little island.
I was going to say, that's more than enough. 400,000 tourists is a lot for an island population like the Seychelles, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I don't know what's happened to my... Oh, here I am. Okay. Yeah, so, and here's the...
Oh, we'll give it a second. The gremlins are in Alan's computer. Oh, yeah, you're back.
A 4-star airline. So we discovered that, yes, we could compete. So in actual fact, what we learned, and this is something that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, and what I would tell all other African countries, don't be afraid of competition. What it did was it made our national airline stronger, more lean. Today, we still have our national airline. Today, it is carrying cargo. Today, it is just waiting for some more borders to open to resume operations. And it's still as nimble and as flexible as ever. And we're still proud of it. And I think there's nothing, we have been living proof that more competition does not mean the end of your national airline. In fact, if anything, if done properly, it means you actually have something that's you're even more proud of it. And this is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. So in that sense, yeah, we fully endorse opening the skies. And the one thing that I would add to this discussion, which I don't think maybe needs mentioning, is it's not enough just to open up your skies. In the case of Seychelles, we actually had a national carrier and an aggressive tourism ministry. And it's a coordinated stakeholder effort. So the way I would look at it is like, let's say SAATM is like you're opening up, you're saying you're going to have a wedding, and you buy your hall and you've got everything there. But did you send out the invitations? So part of what you need to do with SAATM, in our case, is we didn't just open up our skies. Air Seychelles, in this case, was aggressively pursuing partnerships, was aggressively opening up new routes. The tourism ministry and our tourism board was also actively lobbying for the airlines to come. So in our own experience, you need to also include that as part of what will make the operationalization of SAATM effective, in that you combine the opening up of your skies with a national drive for your local entrepreneurs, for airlines, both locally and abroad, to take maximum advantage of that. And then let the chips fall where they may, and let the plants flower. And so that's it. Life breeds more life. It's like a garden where as soon as you grow more plants, more flowers come, more birds come, more everything comes. So I've seen it in real life. It works.
Fantastic. So don't be afraid of competition. There's the quote, which is great. And also the thing that you touched on there at the end is it's this unified stakeholder approach, which is absolutely vital to getting things done, that everybody's pulling in the same direction. And that brings us quite nicely back round. Now, I'm conscious of time. We've got about 15 minutes, I believe, so a bit less than we thought we did. So we'll need to go through the second round of questions a bit quicker. But talking about that kind of stakeholder approach or doing things alongside each other, I want to come back to Eric to talk a little bit about Agenda 2063, which Funke mentioned as well. You mentioned at the beginning, Eric, but how do they all fit together? We've kind of got three things. We've got the African Continental Free Trade Area, we've got SAATM, and we've also got the push for free movement of people as well with the uni visa. So how do they fit in? And do all three initiatives need to progress at the same speed to be successful? Or do we, is it possible that two do succeed and one fails or struggles? I'm sure that's not in your kind of your thoughts, but how interconnected are the three of them, Eric? Just to come back to you.
Thank you, John. It's really interesting how the conversation is going. What I wanted to start with, John, is to talk about how liberalization increases trade. The effect of accessing new destinations, better flight connections, and increased frequencies of flights drive wider demand for existing and new products. And I think Funke talked about it. So the first thing is to make sure that the SAATM really works. And then as we move operationalizing the CFTA, then the SAATM will be creating the demand that is needed on the side of the CFTA. Secondly, the free movement of goods, people, and persons. We have the protocol of free movement. We have one passport for Africa. Those are other programs which have to go hand in hand. As we improve on the SAATM, as we make sure that the countries start implementing the SAATM, we also improve on the passports, on the free movement of people, on customs regimes which are harmonized, and other things which are going to support. So what I can say is that yes, the operationalization of CFTA, actually 49 countries have signed. Currently, the CFTA is undergoing some negotiations to make sure that all the trading services and other agreements made under the CFTA are implemented. I think they have some deadline to complete by end of this year, those negotiations. So the SAATM will also continue, but as we move, the SAATM will be supporting the CFTA. That's what I can say.
Fantastic. So I'm being told we've got some questions from the floor, but I want to come back to Aaron now because we've touched on it, and I want to know whether anything some things you've heard of sort of given you cause for optimism. But you are, I think we all are a little bit frustrated about the lack of progress in the implementation. So if you were there lobbying right now, Aaron, which of course we are, but what do you think we need to do right now to get this mobilized and to push things forward? You're on mute, Aaron, if you can just turn your sound back on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being a diplomat, John. I am still frustrated. I think there's just too much talk. We're not doing any action. So here's the thing. 34 countries have signed SAATM. How many have implemented? I still need an answer. And if I get an answer as to how many have actually implemented fully, then why are we not seeing even one airline or two airlines operating under SAATM? For me, that's where we need to start getting ourselves comfortable, because progress begins when you leave your comfort zone. I go back to Alan and I take my hat off. If I had a hat, I'll take it off to Alan and say, kudos to Seychelles. Because what you did is exactly what we need to do. Do not be afraid of competition. The time for being afraid of competition was in 1963. In 2020, there is no need for anybody to be afraid of competition. You need to see whatever you think is competition as actually people that are going to complement what you're going to do. So, John, we need to have a complete radical review of whatever plans you have. Because those plans, I can assure you, those plans have gone out through the window because of this COVID. Now, you have SAATM, you have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Those two are still going through the process. We have now 49 signatories to Continental Free Trade Agreement. But I can assure you, John, you can't even take your potatoes or yams or plantains from Lagos to Accra without having to face some kind of restriction. That's how they're going to trade. So I still think that there is a lot of heavy-laden feet in terms of moving forward. So my view is two things. Number one, we need to be able to say, can we even find 2 or 3 like-minded, willing, capable, and able entities like, for example, Seychelles? Who else is like Seychelles on the continent? Who says, let's open up. If we get hit by competition, we'll get hit, but we'll still have a plan. We know what we want to do. So let's find those like-minded people, organizations, entities that want to be able to say, let's embrace SAATM, let's embrace the ACFTA, and let's get going. Number 3, what we need to do, John, is we need to say, even though we know that there are going to be challenges, we have the monitoring body, like you mentioned. We have the executing agency. I want to ask a question which I know there's no answer. What are you monitoring if there are no execution parties? What are you executing if there is nobody executing? We will go back, I can tell you, John, we will come back to this particular day next year and we will have the same conversation, not having any concrete proof or evidence of anybody embracing and implementing what we are talking about. So I am really frustrated because there's a lot of talk and no action. For me, the hashtag is #get going. No more comfort zone.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for the rallying cry. I think if we're waiting for consensus across the continent, we're never going to get it. We'll wait forever. So it's those who are ready, be brave, take that step, and go for it. So I think our MC has some questions from the floor. So we're going to go live to Kigali for some comments, questions.
Thank you, John. I do have one. This is from the platform coming from Tess. It says, are there opportunities with SAATM to develop new routes from East Africa into Southern Africa, example, Victoria Falls, so that they don't have to depend solely on Johannesburg for connectivity?
Absolutely. I don't know who'd like to take this. Hi, Tess, sit down there in Cape Town. Really great to see you. I mean, from I don't know whether anybody on the panel wants to take that specifically. Aaron's probably the closest because he's down there in South Africa. You're on mute, Aaron. If you just take your mute off.
What was your question, John?
It was about, is there more scope to have East to Southern African flights through places like Victoria Falls? I think what Tess is touching on is multiple itineraries. So, you know, within Africa,
Definitely. That's the kind of thinking that we want, John. We want those ideas to come up and be implemented, because we have also come to realize that the notion of end-to-end or what airlines call OMD, point-to-point, is no longer viable. People now want to travel to 2-3 destinations on one journey. So what's stopping somebody from starting off in Lagos, stopping in Kigali, stopping in Victoria Falls and ending up in Cape Town, or starting up in Maputo, going to Dar es Salaam and ending up in Seychelles. The moment you start doing that, you realize that even the airlines themselves are actually have a lot of work to do in terms of, do they have the right equipment to be able to do this? You can't take a heavy operating aircraft. Maybe some of them even want to have jet operations, but they are very profitable, very efficient, comfortable turboprops that can do this thing for you. So you need to have a complete rethink of how do you get these routes to start working for the purpose of, number one, opening up the continent. I can tell you, John, there are pristine places that all they need is maybe 2 or 3 flights a week, and they can be flooded by customers who are sick and tired of going to the same places. So we need to open up and start thinking differently.
100%. Just to add to that as well. Sorry, Makeda. Can I just add to that slightly? Just to say, too often from what I see when I work with airports and destinations, the focus, first of all, when they're talking about new routes, is they want routes with Middle Eastern carriers, British Airways, American Airlines, whatever it may be, rather than looking at the ones in the region. And a great example is United Airlines, who are starting flights they started to Cape Town. And basically, they are doing that because they realize that people who arrive in Cape Town, because Cape Town have built up a really good African network, they can now fly from Cape Town to Kigali via Harare with Rwandair, for example. They can fly with Ethiopian through Victoria Falls to Addis, or they can go to Zanzibar, or they can go to Mauritius. So they can have the Cape Town holiday, they can have the wildlife experience, they can have the beaches all in one itinerary. And that's what the American tourist wants. It's a trip of a lifetime. So it is happening, but it needs to, there is opportunities obviously to have other hubs within the region. So I hope that answers your question, Tess. Back to you, Makeda. Sorry.
That actually wasn't me, but I do want to say that you only have 4 minutes left for this conversation, so maybe we can begin the final thoughts and the wrap up.
Right,
please.
John.
Okay.
I just wanted to weigh in here. I think that the momentum had already started being built to address the points that had been raised, both by the question from the floor and the comments made by Aaron. The raison d'etre of aviation, the reason why we're here, is to connect people to places. It's just that simple. And we had examples already that we could showcase in 2019 of some of the carriers starting to do exactly what it is that has been described, taking people from point to point to point to point on the same journey. It was already happening. Our momentum has been slowed down somewhat by the pandemic. But again, just to emphasize that we do have a blank sheet of paper. We can start afresh and look at things differently. To Aaron's point about things not quite happening, again, it's a question of eating the elephant a piece at a time. Let us look at those who are willing, as he mentioned, our focus. That was our sort of marching orders from last year. That's what we were supposed to do in this year before crisis, and we've seen how we start aviation without airlines. Absolutely fundamental. Governments obviously can't continue to give, go cap in hand and support the airlines indefinitely. But again, trying to see where efficiencies and cooperation and scale can be developed through better cooperation amongst the industry. I think that will go a long way in supporting. But that's the first thing. You need the airlines to do those connections between people and places. The second thing is that you can't have a restart or recovery of the industry and connectivity without access to markets. And so we have to continue to advocate for market access and entry, and also looking at the operational side of things, which is that countries who are reopening and imposing quarantines, for example, of 14 days or even 7 days, quarantine is as good as not opening your market. If somebody wants to go on holiday, they're not going to sit there first for 14 days before they can go out. They want to go on business.
Absolutely.
They have to do. So it's to restoring the market and points. And of course, we have several issues. As Eric mentioned, this is a collaborative effort. It's a multi-stakeholder effort, to Alan's point. So we just need to look at this holistically and chip away at it one piece at a time. We have an opportunity to do so now, and let's seize on it.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to come back to you, Alan, just to talk a little bit about how the pandemic, just as a closing remark, but how the pandemic's impacted the importance of aviation into the country from a trade perspective as well. I know you touched on this earlier, but if you can just give us that as your final thoughts.
Thanks, John. And what I will say is this: the thing I've learned the most since I've been a principal secretary is I came from the aviation industry where you had to focus on the passenger, how to delight your customers. I've gone from being a poacher to a gamekeeper now as principal secretary. And the one thing that I observed right away was what works is facilitation. I know we talk about national facilitation committees and things like that, but the majority of my time, what we've had to do in this crisis is everybody had to get together. Health had to work together with the airports, had to work together with the airlines, and we realized we had a lot of things that were missing. And so what we're doing is we're meeting weekly, we're meeting daily. I spent 2 weeks myself at the airport where we were redesigning the airport experience because initially with all the health documents, it was taking an hour and a half to process people, and we got it down to under 3 minutes, even 20 minutes on average for a flight, because it was just being clever and thinking about this is not acceptable for what the passengers experience. And so in the pandemic, we've had to reinvent ourselves. We have to question assumptions. It's not just airlines alone. It's a destination where everybody has to work in concert, like Funke said. It's about what are the role of quarantines? How do the airlines know what they know? How do you communicate to the passengers? How do you make sure all the hotels have everything ready? Do you have the transport ready? And to me, this is the most vital element of making SAATM alive and for overcoming the pandemic. So when we had cargo restrictions, all the airlines went down. It was Ethiopian that came in. It was Turkish that came in. Seychelles was flying, and then Emirates came again. And so we just had to be very flexible in the way we do things. And so my honest advice is, one, don't be afraid of competition. But second, it has to be a focus on the passenger, and it requires all stakeholders together so that you are selling your destination. And that's how you win it, and that's how you get back. And don't be afraid to reinvent yourself. So we've introduced a new digital platform for how people authorize themselves to get into Seychelles. And it's been fantastic because that's what people wanted. They wanted comfort when they come on the flight. And again, it's thinking about the passengers. And so we're ready for the next side of the pandemic. And we're going to grow faster than we've ever grown before. Difficulty creates genius, creates opportunities. And that's what you do. And together.
Fantastic. Real great rallying cry to close the session there. I want to say as well that of course, what that's about at the end, and a thing that I think we need to focus on is about reducing friction. So there's a lot of friction in the travel process, be that because of 9/11, we have all these extra security. Now we're going to have sanitation measures. So we need to think about the passenger experience. How can we make it as frictionless as possible to get them through? And there's some great work being done around the world with that as well. So thank you all. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you, Funke, so much for joining us. I could have done this for another hour. I'd be very happy to do that. But I'm very conscious of time and the great panels we've got. So thank you all. Thank you, Kigali. And back to you, Makeda.